Dead, as you know, is a feast which is commemorated in mostly Mexico, but also in other Latin American countries on the 1st and 2nd of November. And what is commemorated is basically the memory of the deceased, of the ancestors, of the people in your family and kin who died. And there's a kind of division. It depends a bit on which village you're in or which city you're in, but the first day is mostly known as Dia de los Angelitos, so the day of the little angels, so children who have died, who are in the family but who are deceased. And the second day is then the Dia de los Difuntos, so the day of the adult dead, so to say. And so basically what you remember is your relationship with your ancestors, with your dead family.
And if there are children who don't have a family, can they just go to someone else's family to visit?
That's a good question. Actually, I'm not sure about that. I think mostly people, actively living people, commemorate their own families, so they would not very easily commemorate another dead child. But I imagine that spiritually it would be possible, but I'm not sure.
What are the typical nowadays traditions of this feast?
Well, mostly the feast day itself is only 2 days, but the preparation for the feast starts a lot, beforehand, because people make meals, the favorite meals of their families. They make little sugar skulls made of hard sugar, which are offered to the dead, and afterwards the living can eat as well. There's pan de muertos, which is bread for the dead, basically, which is made either just as a piece of bread or in the form of skulls of animals or whatever, which we have in our collection, for example, as well. We have a very large collection which was collected in the 1970s of bread in our storage. So I'm very curious what this bread looks like nowadays.
Yeah.
So people make all kinds of different things. They go to the graves of the people who've died, they clean the graves, they decorate them with flowers, mostly marigold flowers, which are very cempasúchil, I think in Nahuatl is a very the typical flower. It's an orange kind of flower, which has a very nice smell. And some people say that this flower has been chosen to attract the dead because it smells so nice, and then the souls of the dead come back to their families. So the tradition is commemorating, cleaning the grave, making food and drink, objects and altars in your house for the dead to come and to be with you for a day. And it's very important to keep them happy, because some people say that if you don't keep your ancestors happy, then their spirits will return and stay on earth, and bad things will happen to you.
What objects are part of the ritual, and how is it used during the ritual?
Well, as I said, a lot of the objects that are in the altar, so you make a house altar or you make something on the grave as well, and a lot of it is food stuff, so mole or bread or sugar or whatever. People burn incense a lot of the time as well, so episcopal burners, which nowadays are more standard, but the archaeological ones are more recognizable. And well, as I say, they're used to keep food or to offer stuff to the dead.
And what part of that is Spanish and what part of that is indigenous food, for instance?
Well,
Chocolate is obviously indigenous.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, a lot of the traditional foodstuffs that are offered, such as tamales or mole or chocolate, are more traditionally indigenous. Looking at the tradition itself, it's kind of hard to separate between what is indigenous and what is not indigenous. For 2 reasons. First of all, I'm not sure if it's a very relevant question nowadays, because it's just the tradition nowadays is as the people know it to be, so separating out the two is not very necessary. But the other thing is that the Day of the Dead, or let's say the All Saints Day, the All Hallows Day, which Christians celebrate in Europe since I think the 9th century, is very similar to the way that it was this festival, because there were 2 festivals with the Aztecs as well, we know from documents, the Little and the Great Festival of the Dead, and the way they were feasted were very similar. So people would go to graves, clean the graves, commemorate the dead, etc. So because of that similarity, it's very hard to separate the two. But we know, well, as I said, from Sahagún mostly, that there are descriptions of rituals that were made for the dead in the 9th and the 10th month of the Aztec calendar. And these were probably just moved to November to keep the same kind of festivities under a Christian guise so that it wouldn't be persecuted, but you can still do the old festivals.
So most of the festival is actually more the traditional one and not actually the Catholic one. Because the Catholic one is quite different. I mean, it's really, you go to a grave in the morning and it's more like a feast.
I think it's kind of double. On the one hand, yes, you're right, but I think on the other hand, you should keep in mind that the way that All Saints and All Hallows Day were feasted in Europe in the 16th century was very different from the way that we celebrate it now. And especially also that in the south of Europe, it's celebrated in a very different way than we do here in Holland and North Europe. And in the south, it's really much more of a festivity, and people go to graves and commemorate, etc. And obviously, the people who went to Mexico were people from Spain and from Italy, from Portugal, who took this southern tradition with them rather than our Dutch, very strict mourning tradition. So I think that's also the interplay you see between different versions of Christianity as well.
What is the importance of conducting research about the origin of traditions?
Well, I think, as I said, I'm not sure if you mean by the origin of tradition, if it's really that important to separate out the origins of separate parts of the ritual. Mainly because, Mesoamerican current day culture is always seen as like syncretic culture, different parts from different places being integrated into one culture. And the culture as it is nowadays, I mean, is the culture as it is nowadays and has been so for 500 years, so by now it has become its own proper culture. Exactly. So I'm not sure but is that what you mean by origin of tradition, or not so much?
The situation in Mexico nowadays is that the history starts with Cortez. Everything before that is just not important. People there don't seem to know it. So it would be important for them to know it. We, as archaeologists, find it very nice to know.
Well, I think there's a lot of different layers in what you're saying. On the one hand, you're right in saying that indigenous people and indigenous history are very much disregarded. On the other hand, the Mexican state does say, well, we're the heirs to the Aztecs, and the Aztecs were great ancestors, and we stand in the tradition of the Aztecs who were conquered, but who resisted the Spaniards, etc. So there is also this tradition of, at least in name, following the Pre-Columbian culture. And on the other hand, there are the indigenous peoples themselves who are mostly ignored by mainstream society and mainstream historiography, but who see themselves as standing in the shoes of their ancestors. This is also a very important part of the dead. You commemorate the ancestors and you live your life the way they did. In certain aspects, obviously, things change. So I would say that for them, there's not really this distinction between Christianity and indigenous tradition. It's just what we do, and it incorporates different parts from different parts of the world, basically. But it's not really the interesting point for them. For them, it's just this is our tradition, this is our ritual, wherever it came from. Well, it's ours.
What is the best way to communicate the importance of this research to the public?
Well, I'm not sure if it's the best way. What we try to do here in the museum is, through showing this kind of pieces which show like the syncretism between indigenous religion and Christianity, and by showing also these calaveras, these statues which are very iconic of Mexico and Day of the Dead nowadays, to show the different ways that indigenous peoples have dealt with colonization and with forced Christianization, to show how they've been able to make it part of their own culture without losing what was before, to integrate it in the live culture, and also the way that they artistically, handle these kind of things, and how stuff like the papier-mâché sculptures become famous all over the world, and how all these influences come together to create a new culture, which is then globalized. So that's how we try to do it here. I'm not sure if it's the best way, but it's a way at least.
It seems to be a good way.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
sea por completo.